One of the podcasts I've been wanting to talk about is being tired and being able to work through and how to manage your self-tiredness. This may get a little uncomfortable of a topic as I go through it and kind of what I'd like to discuss and share. So going to be probably several people who are extremely safety conscious, and you might find this podcast questionable. I'm just going to give you that disclaimer up front. But part of my goal with this is I want to be genuine. I want to be upfront with just how this is. This is a sector of the industry that it is a legitimate safety issue at the end of the day. But what actually happens in the field when it gets down to it, this is true no matter where you are. I know that a lot of companies are extremely safety conscious out there. Even those companies, when it happens there, they're not the wiser as to what's going on, and their technicians are hiding it. I want to talk about it from a perspective of when this happens, how you can try to properly manage it, and when do you just stop? When do you have to stop? Now, I'm hitting on the safety aspect of this real heavy up front because I want you to understand that discussing being exhausted and tired and how to work through that on a job site, and sometimes the hours that this turns into, officially shouldn't happen, and it shouldn't be this way, and you shouldn't push yourself on an official level. A company shouldn't ask you to do this. You are supposed to have proper, adequate time, and I want you to understand that going into this podcast and conversation. I got a big retrofit going, and I'm working this job at the moment. I'm organizing my tools because everything's an absolute scattered mess right now, which is what happens if you've ever done this before. I'm working on commissioning phase of the project and trying to get this system kind of tuned in, make sure that it will actually stay online. We had to do a repiping on a 200-ton split system. This system had some issues with the original piping and configuration work, and it's a long explanation. Regardless of the explanation, what it led to, an unexpected overnighter, was not anticipated. We had a strong plan we went into the other night. I guess right now is Friday morning. This would have been Wednesday, so we had approval. We're in very mild weather right now. We were going to shut down all the mechanical cooling and repipe the system, and I had what I thought was a sizable enough crew to actually get that amount of work done in the time given. As with anything though, you run into little hiccups and complications. We started the day Wednesday at 8 a.m. and we finished and left the job site at 4:30 a.m. Thursday morning. Well, part of the requirements for the building was we had to make sure that the mechanical cooling was functional enough to support the building, which basically meant we needed one condenser online of the two that we have. We had to be back by basically about 10 o'clock because they had economizer free cooling up until about 10, then the outside air conditions were going to get too warm. What that meant for me in particular, I live 2 hours away. It was not worth the drive home at 4:30 a.m. nor was it safe enough for me to drive home to do nothing more than basically take a shower and then come back and be back here at 10 o'clock. So out of just time and safety, I decided I was just going to sleep in the truck. I drove to our shop and crashed in the parking lot for a few hours. I think I got to the shop at about 5 o'clock, went down. I was up by 8 as everybody started kind of filtering into the shop, and there was just too much going on. I couldn't stay down in the truck, so I got up for a little bit and kind of hung out, and then I took my time getting here, and we weren't in a hurry yesterday because we had to work the whole day yesterday as well. I got a night's sleep overnight last night, and then we're back on site at 8 a.m. this morning. A lot of things start to happen to you and your body when you push yourself to those levels of exhaustion, and those things aren't necessarily, well, not even necessarily, those things are not good things. And in these situations and conditions, this is where a seniored technician, not necessarily a senior, but a seniored, somebody who is experienced and has kind of lived through this life long enough, that experience begins to show its value, because those guys, you'll see, they know how to work in those conditions, and they know how to continue functioning. And then your younger guys who haven't lived through that enough times will be the ones that struggle the most. And you have to keep the most eye on and pay the most attention to, because they're going to be the ones to ultimately go down. Now, I do apologize if I get a little incoherent at any point in this conversation, just because, you know, one night's sleep is not near enough to recover from this, and that's one of the things you have to take into account. So if you're going to start working extreme hours, you have to realize the recovery time for that is fairly substantial. I don't know the actual math or numbers behind it, and I'm not educated at that scale. But you, from experience, you need a significant amount of time. So let's say you work a full shift more than what you're used to working. And so normally your body could recover from that in, you know, a typical night of 8 hours sleep or 7 hours, however much sleep you're used to getting. You turn around and do an overnighter like this or something to this level, that recovery time can easily turn into 2 or 3 nights of decent sleep to get your body feeling normal and even remotely functional again. And this is one reason why I wanted to do this while I'm in this state, because, well, I can speak the most accurately to it because I'm sitting here and I'm currently feeling it, and I literally am in the process of trying to recover from it myself. So let's talk about what happens, what you feel, and just how your body starts to react. Now, this is going to be slightly different from person to person, but for the most part, people start to get abundantly lethargic. Your head begins to cloud. You have a hard time thinking and processing what it is you're doing and what's in front of you, and a task that would normally be a very quick instant reaction turns into, there's a little bit of a stutter, there's a delay. You don't just respond like you expect yourself to, and that in and of itself can start to get frustrating. And then, you know, small annoyances that, like right now, I am looking for my channel locks, and I swore I had them right here. That small annoyance becomes, I'm getting pissed off, frustration. Not because it's a big deal, and in the context of what is happening, it makes total logical sense. Your mind's ability to make that logical sense it's not there. That same level and scale isn't happening. So you have to be aware of that. You have to be mindful of that. Where you'll get yourself in trouble is when you're not aware, and a lot of this just comes down to, you have to live it enough times and experience it before it can fully make sense and be legitimate in your mind. Even then, after you've experienced it, if you're not that mentally strong to begin with, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean that in just a legitimate, some people just aren't as mentally tough, just, I don't know how else to say that, as other people are. Where that becomes a problem, making a judgment decision on what is safe or not. It is much easier to make an unsafe decision. For example, continuing to work. It's easier to make an unsafe decision that, you know what, just F it, I'm here, I'm going, I'm just gonna keep going until we're done or until somebody drops. That can be an unsafe decision depending on what it is you're doing, that can lead to people getting hurt. All right, found them. So this is a prime example of what I'm actually talking about. I left these inside the air handler. I was using them to help me as a backup to adjust valves, and I forgot that's where I left them. But I thought I had moved them, but I didn't. I hadn't moved them. And anyway, your memory becomes shorter, and you'll have problems with remembering what it was you were doing and why that thing was important. And that plays even into measurements. You know, you'll say you were trying to take measurements of a piece of pipe or something. Well, you might have to start writing those down, because remembering the measurement you took from where you took it to where you need to cut it might become challenging. And I'll use that as a segue to kind of go back to what I started to say earlier about how this is where an experienced technician who's lived through this, or somebody who's done this long enough, you know, you do generate a lot of muscle memory and in just what you do. And you'd be surprised how much muscle memory you create, it ends up getting carried with you. Where that comes into play, when you can no longer really think effectively. You know, your mind becomes so clouded by the exhaustion and the tiredness that your brain is not processing the information. That muscle memory begins to kick in. Well, for somebody who is inexperienced, that's going to be a lot harder because they don't have that same level of muscle memory. And so that night, for example, my mind got to the point where I wasn't doing a whole lot of thinking. End of the day, there wasn't much thinking happening, and there was a whole lot of just my body knows how to do this. My body knew the goal I wanted to achieve, and my body just started doing what I've done for years to get the results I was seeking. Is this a safety hazard? Is this a safety issue? You better believe it. Should we have stopped? Yes. So let's talk about that. Okay. So why in the world would you continue working, and you, like, if you're going to get to that point, you're obviously not getting as much work accomplished as you would if you were of right mind. You were rested, you weren't tired, and so if we'd have just called it a night and gone home. Well, there is a breakover point between every time you stop a job and then come back and start. It takes time, even for good workers who know how to get stuff done. They're not there to play around or waste time or do anything else. Even for those guys, you've got a decent amount of everybody's kind of getting back in the groove and getting back on the same page, and they got to pick up where they left off. And we leave, we go home to our families. We're no longer thinking about this for the most part. It's not actively in front of us. So there is a level of time being saved by not having to leave the job and come back to it and everybody get back into that groove. At the same time, once you start to tip over a certain scale, you get to where the time that you're saving, you start to balance that time with how much slower you end up having to move. Strictly because, like I said, you're tired. Your mind, your body, nothing is responding the way it's supposed to, even with muscle memory. Now, to answer the question of why did we choose to do that this way on this specific job? Why would we go to that level of unsafe? Well, one, it was unintentional. We weren't actually keeping track of time that much on the job, and we were so focused on just getting our goal accomplished. One thing led to another, and it turned into 4:30 a.m. before everybody really legitimately just stopped and acknowledged what time it was. So there's that factor of it, which comes back to me as the supervisor and managing that site and that crew. I didn't do a good job in managing that time, which means that on a greater scale, I created a safety hazard at that point. Yeah, I did. I created one because I wasn't paying enough attention to everybody's physical state and the time that it was. So what that means, if something had happened, nothing did, everybody's perfectly fine. But if something had happened, I would hold responsibility for that because I allowed that situation to be created and exist, and I didn't stop the job when I probably should have. Now, the other side of that, the crew that I had on site are guys who would much rather just get the work done instead of taking time, because the alternative, so if we didn't do the one hard overnighter, the alternative would be that we had to spend multiple nights. And my personal preference, and one reason I wasn't really paying enough attention to time, is I would rather have just one hard night, and my guys agree with this. We've got families. We would rather have just one hard night. Granted, we didn't mean for it to be that hard, of just getting the work done, getting the job finished that needed to be done OT, instead of that turning into multiple nights through the week where we're working 4 or 5 hours extra each day. Say we stop at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and then still come back at 8 and have to do that 2 or 3 times, and that's 2 or 3 evenings lost with the family. Or, that turned into an entire weekend day or weekend where we're having to spend a Saturday, Sunday, again, away from the family, and we're not getting to spend that with the people we'd much rather be spending it with other than each other. That is a mindset. Is that a safe mindset? No, it's not a safe mindset at all. It's actually quite the opposite. It's very unsafe. But, you know, for those of us who are focused in that way, it's a sacrifice, you know. It's a sacrifice that we are willing to make. And I'm going to continue to preface here, it was far from intended to be this type, the level of sacrifice that it became. But so is life, and so is big projects, so what are you going to do? That is one major line of thought, though, behind, are you going to stick it out and just deal with the extra hours, or do you stop and now you've got to do this 2 or 3 evenings, or you gotta wait till Saturday or Sunday and do it all then? And it's a hard dilemma, and honestly it's not the same answer every time. Not every job is gonna make sense or gonna be possible to do it that way, especially if it's one where if it wasn't realistic for us to do all that in one night, it would have been very irresponsible to push ourselves as far as we did and to let the job bleed over that long, because we're going to have to do it multiple nights anyway. So if it's that large of a job, then yeah, despite the family time, for safety and for just being wise, it wouldn't be worth it to go to that extreme. So that's part of the variables. That's part of the what you have to weigh and factor and make the decision in that at that time, what actually makes the most sense. Now, here's where this starts to turn very unsafe. And this part of it's probably my biggest fear as a manager, and honestly one of the things that I even personally struggle with. You know, I've got a 2-hour drive. A 2-hour drive is not very easy to make. Just in general, not an easy thing to do, especially when you're working a lot of hours, you're tired, you got a lot happening going on, yada, 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 yada. And staying up till 11 o'clock at night when you got to get up at 5:30 trying to edit YouTube videos isn't necessarily the smartest thing in the world. Anyway, you've got to be careful driving. You know, I've got techniques and things. You know, I grew up, my dad drove a truck a lot. You know, it wasn't the only career that he had, but that was one of his major ones, and I spent a lot of time on the road with him, and he taught me a lot. You know, he was a commercial truck driver. You know, those guys know better than anybody how to stay awake on the road, I promise you. So I have to utilize a lot of those skills that I learned at that time. For example, you know, coffee is one way to do it, sure, but in actuality, when you're driving, my experience is your blood's not pumping fast enough for energy drinks and sugar or caffeine or anything else to play a big enough role. It'll give you a very, very temporary spike that leads to a fatal crash. And I mean a physical, well, I mean a crash in terms of your energy level and your mental. Like you mentally crash, you physically crash, which then turns into a automotive crash. Yeah, that turns into an automotive crash because you crashed from the caffeine. So in actuality, you know, it's not that simple. And even for the guys who are, you know, a 30-minute drive, which is, I think, pretty reasonable, 30 minutes to an hour for most people, that by itself is dangerous, because that's more than enough time to get way too comfortable in that driver's seat when you're that exhausted. So yeah, you end up taking time you just got to pull over and take a nap. It's something that I hate admitting, but yeah, it has to happen all the time, but just between house and house and work, you can't keep your mind engaged enough to keep yourself awake. And something I do a lot is I have to snack. Now, snacking is not healthy either, because that leads usually to some very unhealthy snacks, and you know, it's an easy way to put on a ton of very unhealthy weight. So you got to be very careful with that in and of itself. But you know, that is one method. You know, chewing gum, again, that's a lot of sugar. Chewing gum or having some kind of physical stimulation like eating can go a long way. For me, you know, listening to podcasts and stuff like that, or just having a conversation on the phone does a lot to help me. There's many evenings where, yeah, me and my wife have to have just full in-depth conversation on the drive home. Sure, we enjoy talking to each other, but if we weren't having that conversation, I would have to figure something out because I don't have enough mentally to keep myself going. And that's when you work those hours and you push yourself to that condition, that is the state you get into. And I've honed in on this specific example on this project and job, but what I'm talking about goes way beyond just what I'm dealing with here on this particular project. When you're working, especially like in the summer, we've got long, hard, grueling hours where it's 3-digit temps outside and we're trying to get everybody's AC going, and you're putting these 12-hour days in, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, you'll push yourself to the same state without having to work friggin' 3 shifts back to back. Like, you don't have to go 3 shifts in to get to the same place. Now, 3 shifts will get you there a hell of a lot faster. But my point is, this is the conditions that we've got to find out how to survive. At the end of the day, I'm not completely sure where I'm going with this conversation, other than maybe some awareness. Yeah, I think that's where I'm trying to go, is awareness. Be aware. Be conscious of this. And you have to know when to stop at some point, somehow. The problem becomes, where do you draw that line that's realistic? And something I see, so for some of you younger guys, I'll be honest, that line of where y'all feel you should stop compared to what we have come up in the trade is not the same line. Sometimes, some younger guys just need to be more willing to suck it up, and it sucks, but it is what it is. At the same time, some of us older guys, or I say older, I can't really claim that title, but those of us who've been in this trade and have come up through the old timers that were the ones that taught us these habits, we might push a little too far. And I don't know, maybe that's just an experience and generational training thing. It's very possible that when I was in that stage early in my career, I had the same issue, and maybe my senior techs that were yelling at me for that stuff felt the same way about me that I'm speaking now. I don't know. There's a whole thing to that you could chase for probably hours and get nowhere, and that opens a whole political conversation and cultural conversation. And that's one of the other symptoms, by the way, is your mind will wander in weird ways that you'll just have thoughts that you don't typically have. And be careful chasing those lines of thoughts, because most of the time they're usually fairly irrational, but they won't feel that way in the moment. You'll realize that later, but if you make a decision on those thoughts versus waiting until you were a little more rational minded, you might regret that irrational decision later. That's not from experience. That's just me speaking from others. Yeah. I haven't had time to look up any news. I did some quick browsing at one point, and I didn't see anything that stood out to me. I did see one article about EPA is looking to ban 410A or is looking at a proposal to ban 410A for 2025 for commercial applications, but maybe I'm just not read up enough on the topic, but I thought that was already a thing, so maybe it was just kind of a clickbaity news article. I'm not sure. Anyway, no legit news segment, so I'll try to have some articles for the next podcast. That being said, if you have any interesting news you think is worth sharing, throw them in the comments down below. Let us know what they are, and if you've got any thoughts, maybe post your article that you wish somebody would make a news article about that's worth reading. How about that? That'll drive some engagement. Anyway, I'm not sure how to conclude this, honestly, other than to say, be careful out there. There's several ways you can drive yourself to this state. Rarely do we do this intentionally. It's usually just the nature of this industry. Even from a management perspective, I intentionally try not to allow the guys to push themselves as far as just happens. But at some scale, I can't stop it from happening either. It's just, it is the nature of what we do, and it's one of the hard things about working in the service industry is this is how it is. It's not always this way. You're not always so exhausted you're falling asleep trying to get home. Not sure what else to say about it. Spend time with your family. I'm gonna enjoy my weekend with mine. I haven't seen them as much or enough this week. Been a crazy week. Hope you enjoyed this video. It'll be probably, I don't know, I don't have any idea when it's coming out. Weeks, month from now, something. It'll show up. You'll know it when you see it. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.